one more time for the Nighthawks.
Johnny Castle. Our special guest, Tommy Lepson. Paul Bell doesn't know we're playing anymore. It's his nap time. Pete Ragusa on the drums. Only about one thing we can do at this point here. And thank you very, very much. Don't forget to come down and see Max and Sharon. They got stuff for sale. Get on the email list, please. Please. Got a fine little mama, man, she really's on the ball. I got a fine little mama, man, she really's on the ball. Well, she's a red hot mama, but you know what? She ain't but 5 feet tall. She's got great big hips, she's got long black wavy hair. She's got great big hips, she's got long black curly hair. She got a little devil in her jaw, and I declare she ain't no square. Look out, Paul. you know, she sure can cool me down. She is a red hot mama, but you know, she sure can cool me down. Boy, when she starts loving me, my love comes tumbling down.
The bear climbed over the mountain, the bear climbed over the mountain, the bear climbed over the mountain, and what do you think he saw? What do you think he saw? What do you think he saw? The bear climbed over the mountain, the bear climbed over the mountain, the bear climbed over the mountain, and what do you think he saw?
And the China too. I sure would like to see what this is doing to you, but I'm gone, 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 gone. Curtains and the China too. I sure would like to see what this is doing to you, but I'm gone, 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 gone. Yeah, I'm gone, 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 gone. Yeah, I'm gone, 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 gone. Roll in my sweet baby's arms. Roll in my sweet baby's arms. Lay around the shack till the mail train comes back and roll in my sweet baby's arms. Ain't gonna work on the railroad. Ain't gonna work on the farm. Lay down the shack till the mail train comes back and roll in my sweet baby's arms. Roll in my sweet baby's arms. Roll in my sweet baby's arms. Lay around the shack till the mail train comes back and roll in my sweet baby's arms. Where were you last Friday night? While I was lying in jail, walking the streets with another man, wouldn't even go my bed. Roll in my sweet baby's arms, roll in my sweet baby's arms. Lay around the shack till the mail train comes back and roll in my sweet baby's arms. I know your parents don't like me, drove me away from your door. I had my life to live over, I'd never go there anymore. Roll in my sweet baby's arms, roll in my sweet baby's arms. Lay around the shack till the mail train comes back and roll in my sweet baby's arms, roll in my sweet baby's arms. Roll in my sweet baby's arms. Lay around the shack till the mail train comes back and roll in my sweet baby's, roll in my sweet baby's, roll in my sweet baby's arms. Shoulder up your gun and whistle up your dog. Shoulder up your gun and whistle up your dog. Off to the woods for to catch a groundhog. Groundhog, run here, Sally, with a 10-foot pole. Run here, Sally, with a 10-foot pole. Twist that whistle pig out of his hole. Groundhog, here comes Sal with a snicker and a grin. Here comes Sal with a snicker and a grin. Groundhog gravy all over her chin. Groundhog. Look at them fellas, they're going wild. Look at them fellas, they're going wild. Eat that hog, boys, cooked or boiled. Groundhog, I dug down, but I didn't dig deep. I dug down, but I didn't dig deep. There lay a whistle pig fast asleep. Groundhog, meat's in the cupboard and the butter's in the churn. Meat's in the cupboard and the butter's in the churn. If that ain't groundhog, I'll be darned. Groundhog. Save the hide, eat the meat and save the hide. Make the best shoestring ever was tied. Groundhog, look at them fellas, they're about to fall. Look at them fellas, they're about to fall. Beat till the bridges won't button at all. Groundhog, little piece of cornbread laying on the shelf. Little piece of cornbread laying on the shelf. If you want any more, you can sing it yourself. Groundhog. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrow since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrow since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found. You brought me nothing but misery. You brought me nothing but pain. Our love is a nightmare every day. Let's toast this bad dream with another round. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrow since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrow since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found. Drunks like I should never fall in love. Drunks like I should never part. We'd be more miserable if we were alone. Let's drink to this aching in our hearts. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrow since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrow since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found. Until we forget the pain we found. happened to me. There's a kid on my knee, a kid on my knee. Look what happened to me. There's a kid on my knee, a kid on my knee. Look what happened to me. When the baby came, I thought, let it be. Don't want no more responsibility. Now there's a cat catching all of the rats, and another one's depending on me. There's a kid on my knee, a kid on my knee. Look what happened to me. There's a kid on my knee, a kid on my knee. Look what happened to me. So we got a dog, he sleeps on the floor. He barks when the collector comes to the door. Got my money, ain't got no more. Baby cat and dog make three. There's a kid on my knee, a kid on my knee. Look what happened to me. There's a kid on my knee, a kid on my knee. Look what happened to me. Just when I thought I couldn't take no more, my husband shows up in this 4x4, the rustiest thing you ever saw. Look what happened to me. There's a kid on my knee, a kid on my knee. Look what happened to me. There's a kid on my knee, a kid on my knee. Look what happened to me. There's a kid on my knee, a cat up a tree, a dog on the floor, an old 4x4. There's no place else I'd rather be. So, look what happened to me. My latest sun is sinking fast. My race is nearly run. My strongest trials now are past. My triumph has begun. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. My latest sun is sinking fast. My race is nearly run. My strongest trials now are past. My triumph has begun. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. I know I'm near the holy ranks of friends and kindred dear. I've brushed the dew on Jordan's banks. The crossing must be near. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Oh, bear me away on your snow.
here?
Councilmember Barry.
Here.
Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Present.
Councilmember Slipper.
Here.
Councilmember Wright.
Here. And if I can just point out that Councilmember Clay will not be here this evening. She is at work. And do any council members have any comments? Councilmember Barry.
Yes, I was very pleased to read earlier this week about an arrest that took place a number of days ago. And the individuals arrested are suspected of having been involved in a number of crimes against Asian-owned businesses in the area. This is going back maybe more than a year, and a couple of businesses in particular have been hit more than once. It's too early to say whether the same group have been involved in multiple robberies of the same place, but I know the police will be looking into that. And it's certainly a relief for the neighbors and for those businesses there to know that it's very likely that the people arrested have been responsible for additional crimes. And I would like to compliment the chief and his department, detectives and officers on duty, as well as the Prince George's Police, who I understand pulled the vehicle over after what appeared to be a robbery in that same part of town on University Boulevard. So Chief is in the audience tonight, and want to thank you again for a job well done.
Any other comments? Councilmember Snipper.
Everybody wants to be last.
I didn't see a hand waving.
I heard more appreciative comments about the Winter Basketball League and the Recreation Department. It's basically going, has gone really, really well. People are very my constituents are very pleased about it. Wildly successful was one comment I heard. It's hard to get better than that. Hard to beat that. And the other is I encourage folks to use the pool Sunday afternoons. I think there's one more Sunday that it'll be free. I think that's right. But even when it's not free, it's not all that expensive. And swimming is great. Recommend it.
Councilmember Wright.
A couple items. One is just wanted to ask the city manager if she could check on where the state highway is with Chicago and Philadelphia. I know there's some planned improvements for pedestrian safety there. That has been asked about again recently by a number of my constituents. Some of it was precipitated by a few incidents that have happened at Holly and Philadelphia recently. There was a car accident at Holly and Philadelphia, I think yesterday maybe, or the day before. And then a pedestrian, a girl walking with her father to school, almost was hit by a large SUV, even to the point where, the crossing guard was there. And the crossing guard was telling the SUV to stop, coming down Holly Avenue. So I think we may need to think about, is there any, I know it's a state highway intersection, but is there anything we could do to increase the safety of those intersections? Maybe we could have raised crosswalks that go along on Holly. It shouldn't seem like state highway would object to that because it wouldn't be on state highway. The state highway road, it would be on our roads. Some of it is that the cars coming down, I think in the morning, really try and go rapidly to get onto Philadelphia. So if we could look at that. Another thing I just wanted to note, I found it interesting that in the county executive briefing to MML, I wasn't there, but I did get the packet thanks to Bruce, that they're getting close to launching the 311 number, which is the non-emergency information number. And I'm just wondering, I'm sure that's a huge technology investment on their part for the technology infrastructure to log those calls and disperse them and keep track of them. And I'm just wondering in the future if there's any way we can partner with them to piggyback in some way on that technology. I think would be interesting. That's something I've been a proponent of here in the city, but realize that it is a big technology investment.
They have said that they would include all the municipalities and that would happen about a year into their implementation.
Great. Great. And then just wanted to mention something that's far off in the future, but it needs volunteers soon, which is Tacoma Park's having its first National Play Day on September 26th at Hefner Park from 11 to 1. Pat Rumba is the person who's taking the lead on organizing that. If you're interested in volunteering to help out with that, they need a variety of different roles. Contact Pat on her cell phone number, 301-928-9962, or email her at pattenn58@aol.com.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to the next item. There are no additional agenda items, and I think we're pretty well caught up in terms of scheduling updates. So we will move on to the public comment period. If there's anybody.
Can I just ask a question about the scheduling?
Yes.
Have we targeted or had any thought on when we might have the public forum for around the license plate scanner? Do we want to wait until we have a draft procedure process before we have that forum, or?
We haven't picked a date yet, but I was assuming that we were going to consider that maybe tomorrow, maybe next week.
Okay. Great.
We'll now take public comment by anybody who'd like to speak on anything that is not on a public hearing or regular meeting scheduled for this evening. So that would be anything that's on our work session or anything that's not on the agenda. And please identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Yes.
Okay, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Ward 4. I want to let you people know that a couple of weeks ago, a peace activist named William Thomas had passed away. You know, he passed away just before he turned 61. He's the one who holds an anti-nuclear vigil down in front of the White House for the past 27 years. You know, they call him William and Thomas Allen, and they hold that big peace activist thing down there. They've been doing it since 1982, I believe, or 83. And they've been out there every day vigiling against nuclear weapons. And he passed away a couple of weeks ago, and on his birthday it was going to be March the 20th, and we're going to be having a ceremony down in Lafayette Park starting at 12 noon, where different peace activists are going to be getting together and to honor his memory and scatter his ashes. And I'd like to invite every one of you people to come down, if you can, to represent Tacoma Park. Also, the day after that, we're having the big anti-war march on the Pentagon, because we still have several wars going on. We still have an economy that's gone submarine on us, and we have troops that are still dying in the Middle East, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and we got to bring the troops home and stop the war. We got Obama in, now we got to let him know what we really want. And also, when it comes to peace activists, one concern I have, and somebody brought up to me about those license plate scanners, is they won't be able to give them to the state police to continue their bothering the peace activists, following them wherever they go, find out where they're going with their friends and stuff, if they're out smoking weed or whatever, you know, trailing their cars around with them. You know, I've been a little concerned about that since we've already had problems with the state police bothering us peace activists and death penalty demonstrators. And I'm wondering, is there any safeguard to be put into those scanners to actually prevent that from being able to be done? Because what's to prevent a police officer from hooking up with a friend of his on the state police, and they can just scan and follow which bar they're going into, which nightclub they're going into, and so forth, is to see if they're going around other people who have had records and stuff. You know, it's going in and out of a psychiatrist's office or whatever. Anything to discredit us. So I'm wondering, that's one concern I have about those license plate scanners. They can become a really formidable tool to harass us if it falls in the wrong hands. And I have some really strong concerns about this. And I wonder if anybody else does too. Thanks for letting me share. Remember, keep the peace. And I hope to see us all down there on the 20th of March, Lafayette Park, 12 noon, for William Thomas.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Jim Kuhn. I live at 41 Oswego. I've lived in Tacoma Park since '97. I'm here tonight to talk about the film festival, which I've been an active volunteer with for the past 3 or 4 years. This is our 7th annual festival. It runs this year from this Thursday through this Sunday. In previous years, we've had the festival the weekend before Thanksgiving, but this year we're trying something a bit different in the hopes that fewer folks that may have family commitments that would prevent them from attending. We continue to fulfill our mission of programming work by local and emerging artists and work that is likely to be overlooked by commercial venues. This year's programming includes topical documentaries on consumption, on politics, on the aftermath of war, in addition to charming animated shorts and elusive, beautiful, and confounding experimental film and video works. For the first time, we have a program entirely devoted to work from Spanish-speaking countries, and our international programming also includes works in Dutch, in German, Serbian, Croatian, Korean, Arabic, Hebrew, Tagalog. As always, all of our events are free and open to the public. You have program guides. More detailed descriptions of each film are available on our website. You may have also seen the announcement in this month's Voice. I hope you can look over our offerings and come on down this weekend. It'll be right here. There's some really wonderful pieces in this year's festival. A little over 3 years ago, Council supported some seed money and encouraged a call for applications for the position of director. Agnes Moon has been our director since then and has brought an infusion of energy and new ideas that have helped considerably with our ongoing success. Because of this, we've been continued to be able to put on an annual festival without a huge cadre of volunteers. Now, we continue to apply for grants and seek additional sources of funding with declining success rates this year over previous years. This year's festival has been made possible in part from support by the city, by the Tacoma Park Arts and Humanities Commission, by the Friends of the Tacoma Park Library, the Maryland State Arts Council, and a whole bunch of local businesses. But we've made it through to age 7 in large part through your support. When we last spoke, you committed to providing staffing for keeping the community center open beyond its normal hours. That kind of in-kind support has been very important with our bottom line, particularly important in a year like this year when grant funding hasn't been as successful as we might have hoped. I hope you'll consider the needs of the film festival when you're in your deliberations about the council grants program. I know I'm not supposed to talk about that. I'd be happy to come back at 9:15, talk with you, then I'll keep an eye on the TV. If I don't make it back, I'd be happy to submit a written proposal that the council consider providing funding to the film festival through the council grants program. And thank you for your past and ongoing support. Come on down this weekend.
Thanks very much for reminding us about that. And this program looks wonderful. And hope everybody comes down and enjoys a number of these. It looks like there's about, I don't know, 40 or 50 different films.
Hours and hours.
Right. Over a number of days. So
I just want to say a big thank you to you, Jim, because you've been dogged about working on this and really, although Agnes has been the staff person on it, you've really been another set of hands doing the heavy lifting, and we're very appreciative of that. And I hope that this is the 7th year, right? So I hope for the 8th year, you'll be holding the festival in refurbished council chambers.
it will be more conducive to a film festival.
Something called a theater almost.
Almost. Is there anybody else who'd like to make comments? Okay, seeing none. Next item is the city manager's comments.
Just 2 brief items this evening. As the council may recall, we had rebid the Park Avenue parking lot project at the recommendation of some of the neighbors. The second bid opening occurred today, and pretty much the results were the same as last time. So we are a little bit short in the budget to do all the things that the neighbors had requested. I'll be working with Sarah Daines basically to go through other capital projects and see if we can identify any savings. So we will be bringing this back to the council sometime in the next couple weeks. The only other item I had this evening is to let the council know, as I mentioned last week, we have issued the request for proposal for architectural services associated with the Public Works facility renovation. Seems to be a lot of interest from architects. We are getting some indication that they might want a little bit more time built in the process between the walkthrough scheduled for later this week and the actual submittal date for the proposal. So Darrell Braithwaite and I will be talking about that. So we might extend the submittal date for the proposals by just a couple days, just to make sure we're not discouraging anyone from throwing their hat in the ring.
I just have a question about that because it came up with the renovation here about whether we said anything specific in the proposals about our expectations about LEED certified, standards, gold, silver, platinum, any of those sorts of things in the.
Yeah, I can send you the exact language tomorrow, but we did basically indicate that one of the criteria for selecting an architect was someone who had familiarity with LEED or other type of green features, and that would be one of the rating criteria.
Good.
That's it.
That's it? Any other questions? Thank you. We will now move to the next agenda item, which is the public hearing on the proposed charter amendments for registration, nomination, and elections. And do we have anybody signed up for the public hearing? No? Okay. Is there anybody who would like to speak at the public hearing on these proposed charter amendments?
Mayor Williams?
Yes.
I thought it might be helpful if I summarized what's in the charter amendment, and then I can introduce Ann Sargent, the chair of the Board of Elections.
Okay.
So tonight you're scheduled to hold a public hearing on the proposed charter amendment to revise the election procedures for the city. The public hearing was advertised in the February Tacoma Park newsletter. It was also published in the February 4th and 11th Tacoma Park Gazette. The full text of the charter amendment has been posted on the city's webpage. The amendment allows for absentee voting without the need to state a reason. That's a change to Section 608. It provides for provisional voting in the event a voter's name is not on the list of voters. That's a new Section 609. We're proposing that Section 601, qualifications of voters, is revised to conform with the state of Maryland qualifications. And I would note that this will not affect the ability of non-citizens to register to vote in the city. Section 602 is revised to provide more flexibility in the dates to request and receive lists of registered voters from the Montgomery County Board of Elections. Section 603 would be revised to clarify that voter registration closes on the 30th day preceding an election. And finally, Section 609 to 614 are renumbered. The amendments are the result of the recommendations and the work of the Tacoma Park Board of Elections and has been reviewed by the city attorney. And I'd like to introduce Ann Sargent. She's the chair of the Board of Elections, and she can answer questions, and she may have some comments.
Thank you, Jesse. Good evening, everybody.
Welcome.
Jesse, I think Jesse covered it all, actually, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
I just want to make sure that there's one more chance to see if anybody wants to make any comments at the public hearing, and then we can close the public hearing and go to the first reading. So I'll just, going once, going twice. Okay. Public hearing is closed, and now we will move to the next item, which is the first reading of the resolution amending the city charter. Does anybody on the council have any questions about this? Any comments? Give you another chance to say anything you'd like to say.
Well, we're covering things that we have in our work plan, so we're making progress on our work plan, and as Jesse said, we made the changes to be consistent with Maryland law and also to provide for absentee voting, a simpler and broader absentee voting process, and also for provisional voting. We think they're improvements.
And I think we do too, judging by the discussion at the work session. Any questions from the council for either the clerk or the chair of the elections board, right? Okay. Any public comment on first reading of this resolution? Seeing none? Oh, wait a minute. We have comment.
I got one question on that, on the absentee balloting. Did you guys get any provisions for anyone if they land in the hospital, say the day of the election, and still can't get to the polls, and they would like to vote? Did they get any provisions that they can bring the ballot to the hospital for somebody to vote on? Because I came close to having that happen, but I was lucky this time. But I've always been in fear of losing my ability to vote if I land in a hospital and can't get out of the hospital. Have you guys got any provisions for that, like an emergency ballot?
There is provision for that. We can accommodate emergency absentee balloting. You could send an agent to request a ballot for you, and it could be delivered to you on election day even.
Well, that's good. That's what I was concerned about. And other people have asked me about that too. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. All those in favor of this resolution, please say aye.
Mayor Williams?
Hmm? We need a motion. Well, so said something.
Move it. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Barry, seconded by Councilmember. You moved it? Okay. Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Barry. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries at first reading. Next item on the agenda is the first reading ordinance amending the code, Chapter 3, Ethics. Is somebody going to make any comments on this one?
We were expecting the Assistant City Attorney, Ken Sigmund, to be here. I think since you're a little ahead of schedule, I think he has not yet arrived.
Well, then, maybe we will postpone that item, and we will, we have speed hump items. We have, maybe we should go to because I want to make sure if anybody's coming to comment on speed humps, we're going to be even earlier for those items. So maybe if we move to agenda item number 6, the single reading ordinance authorizing the purchase of police vehicles. This also might make the chief and, I'm not going to get the rank right, Richard Bowers, Lieutenant Bowers, happy, because then they might be able to leave a little bit earlier. So, welcome early.
I appreciate that. I'll be real brief. It's continuation of the policy you all established before I got here. It's replacing cars and bringing 5 more cars into our uniform fleet. Straightforward. I would say this, since I've been here with the car program, we've been now at full strength for 18 straight months, and other jurisdictions have come to us talking to us about our policy because we've been able to retain people as a result of this policy. So the program continues to work, and we're obviously looking at different ways to make our fleet more efficient.
I have one question. I see that this is for the purchase of 5, and there were 7 in the budget, and I see that when you take the portion, the 5/7 of it, that we're all set. Are you going to come back for 2 additional ones, or it's
Yeah, those are unmarked cars, and we're still looking at that.
Okay. Any questions? City manager has a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure the council did note that what we are proposing this year is a change in financing practice compared to the last few years where we have leased the vehicles. That's essentially covered in the budget amendment that's next on the agenda, I believe. But I just wanted to make sure the council was aware of that.
And the reason for the change?
And we looked at basically what it would cost to lease the vehicles compared to what it would cost to buy them. And since we had sufficient funding in the budget, both the finance director and I didn't see any point in the city paying interest charges on a lease if it was not necessary.
And the reason that we leased over the last few years was that it made it more affordable up front as we were adding vehicles?
Yeah, I think in the very early, especially the first year of the program, we were just trying to get into a practice where we could have some kind of consistency and steadiness in our budgeting, and that just took a little while to ease into.
Okay. Councilmember Robinson.
These are Dodge Chargers, and that's different from the GMCs that we've had in the past?
We've had the Crown Victorias. We're looking to be more efficient, gas mileage-wise, and we did a lot of surveying and looked at vehicles, and most of the jurisdictions are going away from the Crown Victoria because of the gas mileage. Based on some of the numbers we've got from Montgomery County, that's why we're going to the Dodge Chargers. Most departments are now going away from the Crown Victoria. Obviously, gas mileage is important to us to be more efficient.
What's the relative gas mileage generally for a Crown Vic and a Charger?
We average about 12 miles a gallon, 12 to 14 out of the Crown Victorias. Montgomery County's been seeing 16 to 18 out of their Chargers.
Are there any other cars that get even better gas mileage that are in the realm of possibilities?
We're looking at different cars right now. Right now, there's across the country, there's other departments looking at hybrids as patrol cars. This is the first year it's being done. We're waiting to see the results, and we'll probably come back with something even more efficient next year. But we're looking at the Chargers. All the major departments have now gone to Chargers and away from Crown Victorias. There is a move afoot in the United States right now looking at the hybrid patrol vehicle. So we're going to study the results at the end of the year to see which has been more efficient and works with our program.
And the Crown Vics that we got that was recent, more or less recent, the darker ones. How many did we get?
We currently have 18 of the dark gray ones, and these will be the same color.
Same color. We're not changing color or anything like
When did we get the 18?
We got 15 in the first year, which would be 07. We got 6 total cars last year. 3 of those became marked units, and 3 of those were unmarked units.
And what's the typical lifespan of a vehicle?
6 years. It varies depending upon what the car's assignment is. If it's a marked car and it's a take-home vehicle, it'll last longer than a fleet car will. But we try and get 7 to 8 years out of the car.
And how many vehicles do we have total?
We should have about 42 to 43 cars total, but that's a number of spare cars inside that and fleet use as well. We have some very limited use cars that are for our canine spare car. I mean, it's one car, it's an older car that's been around for a long time, but it gets counted into our fleet, but it very rarely gets driven.
And do you do a kind of a cycling, so you do a third every so many years, or do you wait till the whole mess or a bunch are ready for replacement and then replace those? Or?
We've established how much mileage and where we want to go this year with Public Works, how far we want to take a car, unless something happens. And there's obviously, we've been pretty lucky. We haven't had any lemons, and the cars we've bought have been fairly good. So we've stretched them to the limit.
When you mention Public Works, you mean that they maintain them?
Yeah.
They maintain our fleet.
Obviously, we work with Daryl in purchasing and maintaining our vehicles, and this year when we sat down before we came up with this, we made sure we had a standard that we stick to, and how far we take cars.
So it was 20 over the past couple of years, and then there's 7 here, 27, that's about half. So there's 2 that you're not buying now, and then there'll be another purchase sometime in the next
couple of weeks,
and then beyond that in the next couple of years, right?
Yeah, basically the ultimate goal, because was for each officer when he's got has a year on the job, he would get a take-home car. Our authorized strength right now is 42, but it's really only 41 actual officers that are working, because we have 1 on administrative leave, so we hired 1 over for that. But basically, we hope to eventually have each officer with a car. In the meantime, the ones that are eligible for a car don't get it or paid a fee, which is negotiated with the union.
And if we had 41, or assuming 41 take-home cars, any sense of what that costs the city in addition to what would be fleet cars? I know it's a good benefit for the officers to have a take-home car, but I'm just trying to get a sense of what's the ticket price on that. Is it that we have to have 41 cars as opposed to a smaller number of fleet cars that can be shared?
Well,
and
if
therefore
you
we have to buy
get more take-home cars, the fleet cars, we'll always have to have fleet, but they will reduce as we get further up with take-homes.
Okay, but it sounds like getting a number on what having a take-home car for everybody is difficult.
No, I don't have it right at my fingertips, Councilmember Robinson. I don't think there's any doubt that this is it's an expensive proposition. What I could give the council tomorrow, obviously you've got an ordinance before you this evening that's contemplating $180,000 for 5 vehicles. We also have a number of vehicles, as the Chief and Lieutenant Bowers have mentioned, that were purchased in prior years, which were leased, and I can get you the remaining amount of that lease if that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I can just add that, what was it, about two and a half years ago, that the council made the decision to go from relying on fleet cars to offering the take-home.
Yeah, right before I got here.
And saw the benefit and knew that there was an increased cost. And one of the things that we're always trying to do is to even out the purchases so that you don't have spikes. And part of the way this was structured was to keep it so it's a fairly even number every year. And my sense was on your comments on the possibility of hybrid patrol cars, that one of the big issues there is to have the electrical capacity to run all of the equipment. It's not just will it physically hold all the equipment and will it be powerful enough to do what's needed on patrol, but that electrical has a lot to do with it.
That's why we're waiting to see what the other, because there are other jurisdictions that obviously use the same equipment with us, and there's several cars being looked at right now. And when we actually researched this year with Public Works to see if it was plausible. There's not enough data because this is really the first year where everybody's, well, not everybody, there's about 4 jurisdictions that are doing it, and we'll be able to get the data this year and then look at when we come back. Actually, we've already projected we'll have a smaller number next year because we're getting close to where we need to be, and then it's only replacements. So the number is going down each year.
And Lieutenant Bowers, you were saying that the expected lifespan for take-home cars is 7 or 8 years?
Should run 7 to 8 years.
And the fleet cars have a significantly shorter lifespan?
They get driven pretty much 24/7.
Because you hot seat them.
So you hot seat them, and they're run constantly. And typically, those people who are driving pool cars are our newer officers who have a tendency to be a little harder on a car because they're not used to some of what goes into driving. So they don't last as long. They'll get torn up a little quicker.
Like 4 or 5 years?
They still should make about 6 years, 6 to 7.
I think the other thing is that the officers tend to take better care of their cars when it's their car.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Feeling of ownership.
They stay a lot better. They stay a lot nicer longer.
I mean, that's been a proven fact with take-home programs. They really do take, and the officers appreciate what you've given them as a benefit. And for me, it's the #1 recruiting benefit we have right now. And I think, usually we're always worried about people leaving. We haven't even, they're happy because they know they have what you gave them, and I've said this over and again, is the best benefit you could have ever done for them because it's a really good thing. And now I've had Rockville and both Gaithersburg come to me, can we see your policy and what you're doing and how it's working? And we're at full strength, and I know both those departments are recruiting right now. So that's an unusual story. It used to be the other way around.
Well, I certainly appreciate the fact that we're at full strength, have been at full strength, and that it's also nice to hear you credit the council, although I think you had a whole lot to do with us being at full strength, and I thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, but actually this policy, as I tell the city manager every time I get an opportunity, has really made a difference. It's a recruiting tool, and it is an expensive tool, Councilman Robinson, and the city manager constantly reminds me of that, and in fact, we have to be very careful.
As recently as this morning, I might add.
So I want to let you know, we don't take it, we appreciate the benefit, and we realize what it does cost the city, and we're going to take care of that benefit.
I have one question that I must ask, and that is are Chrysler products no longer on the nuclear-free ban list?
We checked that. I'll let Cora ban.
Yeah, I actually just confirmed that because Councilmember Snipper had asked about it. Spoke to Captain Corsi. He said he reviewed the list, and in fact, he said that at this point there are no American automakers that are on the nuclear-free list.
Thank you.
And Jesse confirmed it.
Councilmember Wright.
I just had a quick question. Do we get any warranties associated with these cars?
Oh, yes.
Because one question is, do we have any concern? It's not totally clear that Dodge/Chrysler is going to be around for a significant amount of time. And do we have any worries if it doesn't matter in 2 years if they're not there? I'm assuming we can still get parts for it, but.
That is many meetings I'm going to on how we can, how the budget's affecting us. That hasn't been an issue at this point. I don't think they're going to go out of business at least for a year or two with things the way they're going right now. But that hasn't been a concern. But obviously the parts would still be there, and we have a very talented public works staff that's been able to handle everything we've thrown at them.
Okay. Any other questions? Would somebody like to move this?
Second.
I think that was moved by Councilmember Siemens and seconded by Councilmember Wright. Is there any public comment on this ordinance authorizing purchase of police vehicles? Okay, since this is a single reading ordinance, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Barry.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Okay, that ordinance passes. And I guess I kind of see this, this next agenda item, number 7, as kind of paired with this, so why don't we take care of that one, and then we'll go back in the agenda to item 3, which is the ethics ordinance.
Just to highlight the changes that I just alluded to from first reading. The amended ordinance that is for the council this evening would essentially eliminate from the budget the lease purchase proceeds we had anticipated receiving, which was in the amount of $255,000. The other change would be to reduce the amount in debt service by what we projected to spend this year on lease payments for the cars that the council just authorized. So our debt service expenditures would be reduced by about $51,000. So those are the only changes from 2 weeks ago.
Would somebody like to move the ordinance?
Move. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Barry. Any questions or comments? Is there any public comment on this ordinance authorizing the budget amendment number 3? Seeing none, we'll need a roll call vote. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Barry.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
That ordinance passes unanimously. Thank you. And we will now go back to agenda item number 3, which is the first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 3, Ethics. And Ken Sigmund is here.
Yes.
And would you like to tell us anything about this one?
Sure. And just to recap the purpose of the ordinance, it's to enable council members to represent their constituents on matters where they have a minor conflict of interest that won't influence their decision-making. It's based on the state ethics code applicable to General Assembly members. And it allows council members to identify and disclaim indirect conflicts of interest and then go ahead and vote on the matter. And also allows council members to vote on the annual budget despite having a conflict, even a direct conflict of interest with one or more items in the annual budget. And then I want to highlight a few changes and answer one question since the council last considered this proposal at the work session. And it's in paragraph D3 on page 5 of the ordinance. And it says, or you all had asked whether a council member who has a conflict relating to a budget item has to disclose that conflict in writing, even though they're allowed to participate in the budget vote. And that was ambiguous in the prior proposal and ambiguous in the state code upon which it's based. But after thinking about it, I think it does make sense to have a council member disclose such a conflict in writing. As a practical matter, they're not going to be allowed to propose budget items where they have a conflict, and they're not going to be allowed to debate those budget items specifically. So it makes sense that they're on the record as to what those conflicts are. The next change can be found in paragraph D4 lowercase b. That's at the bottom of page 5 and continued on page 6 of the ordinance. This is a new provision. I brought it up at the work session. It's something that the Ethics Commission had recommended. And essentially, it requires the council, at the request of the Ethics Commission, to delay action on a matter when a council member has disclaimed an indirect conflict of interest and said, I feel like I can vote on this without outside influence. I can vote in the best interests of the city, and if the Ethics Commission has a concern about that decision, they can ask the council to wait while they issue an advisory opinion. And it could be that the Ethics Commission is concerned that it actually is a conflict that can't be disclaimed, or it may be that they see it's a close issue and it would be better to have an advisory opinion rather than waiting for someone to file a complaint. And
Okay.
that's
Thank you for explaining those. Those are very helpful. Would somebody like to move this?
Second.
Sounds like moved by Councilmember Wright, seconded by Councilmember Siemens. Any questions? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. I see the reference to direct and personal in here. I just wondered that term and other terms within this document are defined anywhere?
They're not defined, but I do try to explain them in. There's a summary, a written summary included in the agenda item.
Right.
Typically, direct and personal would mean a conflict of narrow applicability that has a clear impact on a council member.
And I guess I was suggesting that maybe we should include some definitions within this ordinance so it's clear to the Ethics Commission as they review individual cases exactly what's meant and what the thoughts were of the council when it was approved.
Quick question. Since it's in the summary, wouldn't it be?
But the summary wouldn't be attached.
That's true. It
After
doesn't have
now.
force of law, but it does have intent. It does indicate intent.
I guess I understand your suggestion, Councilmember Siemens. I think the words have their normal dictionary definition. I don't know how we could use a specific definition for this purpose that would cover all issues. So I think we have to use that as our guide, and in close cases, it's the ethics decision or the Ethics Commission that would have to decide what's direct and personal, what's indirect.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Sniffer?
Yes. One of the reasons this issue came up is because Councilmember Robinson was concerned about his membership in that group. I'm going to call it co-op. Was it co-op? Okay. Do you feel this addresses the issue in there because of the way they've done the $1,000 and the various financial interest parts?
If I could explain, the impetus for this proposal was a conflict that prevented a council member from voting on the budget last year. So that was the primary motivation for this. It does not address Councilmember Robinson's concern. felt like we had to get this done before the budget, and I wasn't getting any clear consensus on how to address Councilmember Roberts' concerns. So this doesn't address it, and I think that'll have to be addressed on another day.
Right, I note that. May I say something? I'm reading the part that seems potentially problematic in that light, under C1A, general restriction of employment. A covered person, except as permitted, a covered person may not be employed by any business subject to the authority of his or her governmental unit, or any business entity which is negotiating or has entered a contract with his or her governmental unit. I think that's really the kind of the meat of my concern. In other words, if you have a financial interest in a business and it's subject to the authority of the government in any way, and you made more than $1,000 in that business, you're precluded from serving on the council. That's my reading.
Right.
Right. So the consumer co-op, the TPSS co-op, wouldn't apply because you never get, it'd be a cold winter before you got $1,000 as a rebate, as it were, back from the co-op in the course of the year. But it means that you can't work for any firm that has a contract with the city under any circumstances, and that's my concern.
And we know we're not addressing it tonight.
And we know we're not addressing it tonight.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Any public comments? Seeing none. This is first reading of the ordinance, so all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We will now go to agenda item number 4, which is first reading ordinance authorizing installation of speed humps and other traffic calming measures in the Pinecrest area. I don't think we have staff here to introduce this. We talked about this last week. We had a hearing last week. And I believe this is what we talked about last week. And would somebody like to move it?
Moved. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Wright, seconded by Councilmember Barry. Any questions or comments from the council? Okay. Any comments from any member of the public? All right. Then all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next item is agenda item number 5, first reading ordinance authorizing installation of speed hump on Ritchie Avenue. Would somebody like to introduce
Move it.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Siemens, second by Councilmember Wright. Are there any questions or comments on this one? This was as we discussed last week, and I believe there's a note on here that staff is continuing to work on the possible bicycle-friendly aspect of it, but wanted to bring this forward.
No comments, other than I appreciate the work Public Works has done on this, and I like the fact that it is made more general so that the exact location of the speed hump can be resolved with the neighborhood.
And so that if something further needs to be done in the future, that they don't have to bring it back to us to say, oh, we need one more, or, you know, it needs to be moved, or whatever it is, it can be dealt with more easily.
Right, and I certainly hope the council, I encourage you, Mayor, to consider an agenda item in the future for a speed hump discussion for bicycle-friendly speed humps.
The staff is continuing to research this, and if they have something to discuss with us, we will schedule it. Where are we? Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. So both of those speed hump ordinances will come back for second reading. At this point, I think we'll take our break and come back for our final two items, which are the work session items on the legislative update and the discussion of council grants program. So we'll take a short break. Next item is the legislative update, and the deputy city manager is here to provide an update, and then we may have some questions on other things. I have a list.
Good. That's helpful. Yes, Ann Seacott and Michelle Douglas weren't able to be here this evening. We've been in frequent contact with them, and because it's legislative session, even over the weekends, they're very active, trying to keep us up to date. I did pass out at your seats a summary that was provided by Michelle Douglas today on several items. There's a couple items that are addressed here that I want to go into just a little bit. I'm not going to go into much the just cause eviction. I think a number of you have been briefed on that. It was withdrawn by Delegate Mazur for some technical reasons. But it was, I think one thing that was nice is that we really did get some allies on it through the Montgomery delegation that saw the importance of that. And so it's going to be back next year. Maybe in a slightly different format, but it is something that I think we will be pursuing. I wanted to report a little bit on the program open space bill. There's actually several bills related to program open space in front of the legislature this year. The one that's perhaps most important to us is the question about whether state program open space funds can be used for indoor recreation activities as well as outdoor recreation activities. And it's particularly important because some of those indoor funds are scheduled to help do the renovations to this room. The process of funding both indoor and outdoor recreational spaces and the acquisition of natural land to protect as natural land has gone on for 40 years. And so it's a surprise to have to think of changing this. The city submitted its testimony. There's apparently quite a bit of testimony in favor of allowing POS funds to be used for indoor as well as outdoor recreational uses. Nevertheless, there are some concerns expressed by some legislators. And I think there's a number of kind of background reasons for some concern, but the stated opinion is that this should be for outdoor spaces. One of the things that we put in our testimony that was submitted in writing was that in a space in Tacoma Park, we've used the funds for acquisition of natural land to preserve as natural land, used for outdoor recreation such as playground replacement, as well as some indoor uses such as the game room and the dance room and that kind of thing. And it's often used for indoor swimming pools and gymnasiums, uses that serve the community. One of the things in an area like ours where it's very dense is that we don't have a lot of open space to build outdoor recreational spaces. And frankly, in Tacoma Park, there's no extra space available. And if we needed more developed play areas, we would need to start paving over our natural areas along Sligo Creek or whatever. And we try to have a balance and protect those areas. So the use of these funds for indoor spaces becomes very important. At this point, it's the opinion of Michelle Douglas that the votes on the POS bill could be very close. And so we'll be watching that very carefully. The use of the funds for indoor space is also, is supported by the state government and the Department of Natural Resources. So there's a lot of kind of institutional force for this to go through. Nevertheless, I'm not sure, and I think there's some question about why is there hesitation among some of the legislators on this. As Michelle notes in her letter to you, that some of the officials expressed opposition even when their jurisdictions came and testified on behalf of it. So there's clearly something that's just disjointed there, and we're not really sure what will happen. Nevertheless, when the action happens, this is emergency legislation, so that if the bill passes, it takes effect 30 days after passage. You don't have to wait till the end of the session for the traditional bill signing process, so it would move quickly. At this point, we'll keep working on it and keep you posted.
Can I just ask if you have a sense that there's anybody in particular that we should talk to?
I'll follow up. I haven't heard.
Okay, because it would be helpful to know, because given the schedule of bills and our interest in some of them, there are going to be a number of us who are going to be in Annapolis multiple times over the next week or two, and given the way these hearings go, there should be opportunities to hunt some of these folks down and bend their ears.
I'll find out about that. One of the things that came out in talking with Ann and Michelle about POS items is that one of the other POS bills that's out there would prohibit use of POS funds for almost any kind of paving in and out for outdoor recreational use. A small path is about the best you could get. You couldn't get a parking lot, you couldn't get a tennis court. A lot of things that you would normally use as part of a recreational area, if it's impervious surface, it wouldn't be permitted. And the suspicion, and it may be more than suspicion on that, is that some of the proponents of that bill are upset about something completely different and are kind of taking it out on this. So it's not necessarily a feeling that that's really what POS funds should be used for or not used for, but it's kind of an end run to get back at a different legislator. You know, there's a game that's being played there. So we'll find out if there's a helpful person that you can talk to, or
if we'll be running into a brick wall because it's something that's unrelated.
Completely unrelated, and so we'll need to find that out.
And if I can just point out something, because you just brought it up, I was going to bring it up later, about impervious surface. I was shocked to find that current state law defines as impervious surface areas that are covered with gravel, stone, shell, or pavers, or any other impervious material, because that was part of language in a proposed bill, Senate 672, about stormwater management and stormwater user charges. And when I said, well, even if the bill goes through, shouldn't that be amended? And they said, no, that's already part of state law. So when you're thinking about possible restrictions on program open space not going to impervious surfaces, remember that we're talking about a gravel, stone, or shell path, or little stepping stones. Those are impervious surfaces and not allowed.
So, in any event, I mean, so there's apparently some dynamics here that, are a little bit out of the straightforward nature of what you would see when you read the bill. So we'll find out, and I appreciate that added information. There's a paragraph here about instant runoff voting, and at this point, there's some hearings coming up, but they're having to monitor that situation. There's some differences between several of the bills related to that. We are happy that Senator Raskin has been championing this as a good bill, but I think it's one of these that's not a straightforward win for us, but we will keep pushing on that. Some of the things that are coming up are fairly interesting. As you mentioned, Mayor Williams, this week and coming up, there's quite a lot going on. A lot of the anti-immigrant bill hearings are this week, and some of them are really, fairly serious. One is opposing having anybody be a sanctuary city. That's one where Mayor Williams and City Attorney Sue Silver will be testifying, as they did this identical bill last year. On that same day, I'm sure Mayor Williams can describe what it was like last year but there's a whole slew of similar bills that will be heard in the same setting. One of the ones that came to my attention this weekend was one where if the police stop somebody who they feel is an illegal alien, they are supposed to take a DNA sample. So there's a fairly significant step on and there's all of the motor vehicle ID cards and a variety tuition for, do you get in-state tuition? So lots of different kinds of bills related to immigrants.
And Councilmember Robinson will also be attending that, and I pointed out to him that it'll be an opportunity to see the state legislature in one of its wilder moments.
I'm looking forward to it.
One of the follow-up comments that Ann Seacott forwarded me today was that in talking with some of the Attorney General's office staff, the sense was that all of these bills are from the same sponsors that pushed them last year, and they have about the same level of support as last year, so they're expecting for them to not be approved. Not to say it's not going to be a circus.
It will be a circus, and we still need to go.
And absolutely, that's right.
If we're not there, the opponents will have free rein to say whatever they want, and we know from what they were saying at their rally last Monday night when we were in Annapolis, and we saw a number of them wearing the buttons that they had just been at that rally, that they took aim at us in that rally, and they will take aim at us during hearings. So we'll try and keep them on their best behavior, which I would characterize as not the best. Councilmember Smith.
Oh, yes.
Question.
Yes, Colleen and I were in Annapolis on last Monday night, and we were surrounded by, we just happened to be seated right in the middle of the group, and man, they kept looking over at us because it was clear that they could see the little, Tacoma Park buttons here and there, and they were trying not to look too obvious that these was not really all that pleasant. And I was ready to take them on, and Colleen, who I don't usually think of as someone not willing to do that, said, nah, don't bother.
You're welcome to take some time off work on Wednesday and come down. You'll see them in full throat.
On Thursday, one of the items that will be heard is House Bill 1182, which is Communication Services Taxation and Regulation. This is the bill that Sheila Hickson has put in to spur a discussion on, essentially on cable television fees. There's a variety of issues apparently involved in that, but and it is hoped that it doesn't go anywhere, but that this is an opportunity to discuss the topic. Obviously, from a financial point of view, it's a very serious bill, has serious implications. I think the estimate impact annually to Tacoma Park might be $75,000. It's, I think, $18 million perhaps for Montgomery County. But it's a really significant amount of money that the jurisdictions get for use of the right-of-ways by telecommunications companies, and the use and the whole sharing of making our public access available becomes an important issue. The folks who are involved in all the cable television stations in the jurisdiction have been having lots of telephone conference calls about how to, what to say at the hearing. Mayor Williams, I think you're being expected to testify.
Yes.
For that. And testimony is being written by the group as far as I've heard, so it should come very shortly. Nevertheless, that is something that's very important to our bottom line and the bottom line of neighboring jurisdictions.
I bent Monica's ear at Sheila's assistant's ear at the fundraiser on Friday night, and I called Sheila's office today to make it very clear that we're not in favor of this.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to be testifying against the chair's bill when she's our senior delegate, but that's what happens sometimes.
And one of the things that, we're not really sure the status of this, but sometimes it's the role of the chair to bring up a subject to get it out on the table as a way to send a message that this isn't going to go forward, or it is. And apparently that's one of the signals that we've been told are being sent. So.
And I can also share that this is one of the bills that we discussed at the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Committee meeting on Saturday, and there was unanimous feelings, the same as ours, that this was something that we needed to fight very strongly, and MML is putting together panels of people as well on this. And one of the main points of it is that this has been an effort that I think Verizon in particular has been spearheading nationally. They've tried to make it happen on a national level. That hasn't happened. They're going to the states to try and make it happen. My brother is a lobbyist for the Association of Washington Cities, and I talked to him on the weekend, and he said they just had exactly that same effort in Washington State, beat it back. And one of the big things that would happen if this were to ever to take place would be that the telecommunications companies want to be treated as equal with other businesses where all that's really collected is a sales tax, and they don't want to have to pay for use of the right-of-way. And so if this were to happen, they would be using our right-of-way, digging into our right-of-way, and we would have no recourse to recoup any of the costs that would be associated with that. Right. So if you think about the worst case of WSSC as we've been experiencing it, and imagine no ability to have any recourse with them over anything, that's what this could lead to. Councilmember Robinson, you have a comment?
Not on this item. Are we done with this item?
This one, yes.
I think so.
I have other things to talk about.
Okay, I was curious about HB 790, the County and Municipal Corporation Authority Business Improvement. I just didn't know.
I don't know. I need to print that off and read it more carefully. I don't know what that one is. I'll make sure that I get back to you about that and see what we need to do. Other items that are coming up that aren't on the list in front of you, on March 3rd, there's hearings on the Freedom of Association and Assembly Protection Act. This is an item that a number of us have been concerned about in the community. It's the response to the spying on groups, including in Tacoma Park, that has occurred. Also on March 3rd is a hearing on the task force to study the county and municipal revenue structure. There's been one hearing on this already. However, one of the things that apparently there's direction in the House and Senate to not take on any new task forces, that adds to staff burdens, and they don't want anything that has any kind of financial impact whatsoever. We don't know what all that means. I will say that although the MML was part of the group that requested this task force, I did have fairly significant concerns with the breakout of the number of people who were to be on the task force. If there's only 2 MML reps and 2 MACO reps, and then there's a large number of other folks, so that it seemed to me that MML representatives, municipal representatives, really had the weak end of the stick in this task force, and I would hope that it wouldn't end up that way if it got funded, that there'd be a lot of interest in looking at the revenue structure in a fair way. But I know that there was some brainstorming being done with our lobbyists about how could we get a few more representatives that would look fairly upon municipalities, because in Maryland, municipalities clearly have the weakest options on revenue generation, and some sense of appreciation of that. There may be some ways to add some representatives based on certain kinds of issues or areas of expertise that would help give a little bit more weight to the municipal interests on the task force if it were to move forward.
And my sense from MML staff is that if any task forces do get approved this session, that this will be the one that gets approved.
Okay. March 17th is the second hearing on the repeal of the death penalty, which we did submit a testimony on, as we do each year. The final thing that was on the comments from Ann and Michelle are just kind of the relief that the stimulus package coming to Maryland has brought to Annapolis. The idea that the additional 700 job cuts in the state of Maryland are being postponed at least. And so a lot of work is being done on the governor's budget changes. And so we're waiting to see what the implications are of that. But there's kind of a sense of relief that it's not quite as draconian of a budget situation as was perceived to be when they went into session. Following up on the issue of stimulus, there was a meeting this morning of the County Council Transportation Environment Committee. Councilmember Wright and I attended, lobbying for funding for repair of our 2 bridges in Tacoma Park that are in need of repair. I have to say it was a bit of a disjointed discussion. I tried to write up my notes from it, and I'm not sure that that there's a consensus on it. But one of the things that I felt we did hear pretty strongly was that the county staff seemed to feel that there were ways to get stimulus funding for bridge work. They are urging that the full rehab of the 2 bridges take place with the federal government picking up the 20% of funding that's not otherwise covered by the federal government for these kinds of work.
Who's picking up 20%? The county?
That the feds would essentially pick it up as part of the stimulus package. Normally for bridge repairs that meet federal criteria, the federal government pays for 80% of the repairs, and the local jurisdiction pays for 20%. And this would be to have that 20% also taken care of. If for major rehab, we're talking about $1.2 million, so that's a fairly significant amount of money that it's not in the Tacoma Park budget. So that's something that we need to look at a little bit more closely, and the timing on that. In any event, we need to have some changes, and whether that means working to just get the $335,000 of immediate repair done, whether or not those bridges get the major rehab, we need to see that that money is found, whether it's stimulus money, county money, or some other kind of combination. The immediate action of the T&E committee this morning, though, was to postpone any discussion of the matter to the operating budget discussion before the county, which will take place in April. And so if the county is to assist with the funding, that discussion will come through their operating budget discussion. We are following up quickly, however, with the county staff on any steps that we can take to get this addressed even before that time. Is anything else that, look at my notes.
No, I think the other interesting thing is if it does get to the April time frame and being considered with the budget, Councilmember
That's Florine and Leventhal.
Leventhal was saying that he thought that the bridge should be looked at in context of all the bridges in the county and how critical its repair was based on the state of that bridge versus the other bridges, as well as the location of the bridge, which I think is what we've been asking for before, which is being evaluated in a fair way against all the other county bridges.
That was our request over a year ago, and we were ignored.
Well, one of the things that was interesting in the meeting this morning was that Councilmember Florine said, "What happened to you had this request last year? What happened to that?"
Nothing.
You guys didn't do anything. So that, what it was turned around is that we weren't going along with the federal standards for bridge rehab. And I said, no, the issue was the 20% match. That was $1.2 million. And Councilmember Leventhal said, well, yes, that's a fairly significant reason not to pursue that, and they understood that. I did hear some interest by the higher county staff people to try to work with us on this that I hadn't really heard beforehand, so I think it's something that we should jump on and push.
So we're finally beginning to get some attention and traction after about 15 months of effort on this.
Well, and Councilmember Florine says, you're persistent. I mean, she recognized that we have been pushing on it, and I didn't hear anyone say that we didn't have merit and that there wasn't concern about the bridge. I think the bridges, I think they do recognize that it is important to have the bridge work done.
I was surprised that the city staff, the county staff was so optimistic that we would get spend this money and it could happen really quickly. But maybe they've started to have conversations at the state level about, how much leeway they're going to have to suggest what gets stimulus money in it.
Right, well, they seem to be talking about not the 90 days window, but a second tier window of stimulus money for the longer term, bigger projects. So that seemed to be what they were referring to. We still are looking very carefully at timing issues because although there was some statements that, you don't need to go through a lot of processes on doing this, that's not the case. Having seen what the Carroll Avenue Bridge over Long Branch went through, you have hydrology studies, you have all kinds of, you go through the Corps of Engineer permits, you have a variety of different things that you need to look at, and there's only certain windows of time when you can act in a stream bed. So we'll want to look at that very closely. I've been talking with our city engineer about what is needed and when. He also scoffed at the idea that there weren't studies. He felt that the quickest that a major rehab could be done is in a 3 to 5 year window, and that means you're moving along. So we need to look at that and see what that really means in terms of this emergency repair requirements. Those are the items that I had on my list. There's lots of legislation out there, but I'm willing to pursue any items of your interest and do any research you need.
I've got a couple items, but does anybody else have any questions, items, anything you want to bring up?
Just one thing, Mayor.
Yes.
And that is, Susie, speaking of revenue generation, I noticed that the speed cameras on New Hampshire are installed. The electricians were out on Saturday finishing that job. So I think, City Manager, didn't we hear that at some point soon warnings will be issued before the actual tickets are issued?
We're actually expecting the cameras to be operational sometime in the next 2 weeks. We're not quite there yet. For the first 2 weeks that they are operational, we will be issuing warnings. We will be issuing a press release at the time that they're going into action. So probably sometime in the next 2 weeks you'll see them, but we'll be issuing warnings for some period of time.
Is that the same 2-week length of time that it took to get the crosswalk signs working?
Different vendor.
Different venue.
I thought it was a Pepco we were.
I think we'll be okay on this one.
If we're not okay, we send the police cars over to find whoever we need. And there are a number of efforts at the state level to expand the ability to do this to the rest of the state rather than just in Montgomery County. That's an MML priority this year, as it was last year. There are also efforts to make it so that the state gets to keep all the money. So there are competing bills and competing interests having to do with speed cameras, and it's probably best to just say, stay tuned. And if I can cover a couple of items I've got, one of the items that came up at the Legislative Committee on Saturday was Senate Bill 658, which is the Political Subdivisions Government-Imposed Restrictions on Income-Producing Real Property Fiscal Impact Study bill. It's also cross-filed in the House as HB 916. The MML Legislative Committee voted to oppose these bills, and what they would essentially do is to say, okay, if you propose adopting anything that will put any rent restrictions or affordability requirements on residential property that's rented or leased, the governing body shall request a study from the governor on the projected fiscal impact of the proposed ordinance or regulation. The governor shall direct a study to be performed by either an appropriate state agency or a University of Maryland institution that has the expertise, and then there will be a report back in the next fiscal year for the next budget as to, whether this can be done or not, and yada, yada, yada. And what it essentially says is anybody who wants to do anything that would in any way affect rent control, you have to get a study, and it'll take 2 years to get you the answer. So hopefully that's going nowhere, but that is a bill that's out there. And it's sponsored in the Senate by Senator Peters from Prince George's County, Senator Curry from Prince George's County, and Senator Garagiola from Montgomery County. And that one is having hearing in the Environmental Committee on March 5th. My sense is that that one may not go anywhere, but who knows. There's also another, I'm going to find them on my list here. House Bill 1239, which the Legislative Committee also voted to oppose, which is to restrict rent control only to those jurisdictions which already have it and nobody else can ever do it.
And that would be Tacoma Park and College
In
Park?
College Park, correct. And that one has a hearing in Environmental Matters on March 12th. Then the one that I'm not sure what the impact may be, I'm not sure of the possibilities on where this might go, but it might warrant a little more research by us. I'm also trying to get some answers from some other people. House Bill 947, which is the bill where the Montgomery County delegation is asking that Montgomery County get the same treatment as Baltimore City currently has for highway user revenues. Currently, Baltimore City maintains all of the state highways in Baltimore City, and they get a percentage of the highway user revenues off the top before the formulas go into effect for everybody else. It sounds like Montgomery County would like to do the same. They would like to take over maintenance on state highways in the county, except for the Beltway and I-270.
So they would take over Carroll Avenue?
Well, that is a question in my mind. The language goes two ways on this as to whether they would take all of the state highways in the county that are in their jurisdiction, not in a municipal jurisdiction, or whether they would take all of them. Because if they only take the ones that aren't in municipalities, that leaves disjointed little pieces all over the county of state highways that State Highway would have to come do maintenance, plowing, all of those things on, and we would be even less likely to get a responsiveness level that we would appreciate from SHA.
I'm concerned about also, I mean, with highway user revenue, we do get municipalities within Montgomery County get their own line of
Right.
highway user revenue.
And
Baltimore City does not have municipalities within it.
right.
So being treated the same as Baltimore City.
And
makes me
there's
concerned.
language in here about about the highway user revenues. My sense is that if they do it the way I was just describing, and their intent is to have state highway continue to maintain in a municipality, but not in a non-municipal part of the county, that's one thing. And if they mean to take over all of it, including what's in municipalities, that's another question, and how the highway user revenues get divided. The Municipal League Legislative Committee voted unanimously to fight this bill because from all of the municipalities who aren't in Montgomery County, it was very clear that if Montgomery County was successful and they got their 12.3% of highway user revenues off the top, that would reduce the amount of highway user revenues left to be divvied up among everybody else. So it has for us potentially fiscal impact and physical impact as to what kind of service we might get from state highway on our state highways.
Very interesting.
So I think that one is worth some definite effort on our part to get clarity on what it means, find out the potential for passage, and depending on answers, possibly having to educate a number of the legislators in Annapolis and Montgomery County about what they may be asking for. And the final one is the HB 1141, which is the authority to regulate commercial signs in municipalities in Montgomery and Prince George's counties. And this would enable us to have stricter commercial sign regulations than exist in the county or with parking planning, however those might reside. So I wanted to see if we had a sense of whether that was something important to us and whether we might want to weigh in.
Does this meet the criteria that was raised as a concern about the just cause eviction?
I believe it does. And it's because, well,
I'm just,
yeah,
that's fine, I'm not going to take time. That's,
Yeah.
but that was something I was curious about.
it depends on who you talk to, as was the case with that earlier instance where Department of Legislative Services sees it one way, the State Attorney General's office sees it another way, and what actually happens when something does get passed and is reviewed and how diligently they worry about it.
So the question on this is whether or not municipalities should be allowed, have the authority to be more strict in regulating commercial signs.
And it's being presented as a local bill. It's got a MCPG 111-09 number as well. And it may be, well, I don't know. I think the criteria that was used there for whether it could be applicable to only certain municipalities was that if it was of local concern, and just as with alcohol issues, the impact is local, and with signs, the impact is local, so that may fall under that that criteria.
I see.
And it's just an enabling legislation,
Yes.
right? So why not? I mean,
My sense is that we would
why
say,
not?
sure,
Yeah.
because there may be something in particular that we want to do. But we just need a little bit more information on that one as well.
Okay. Should I assume that because it's enabling legislation, which you normally support, that unless there was something that popped up that seemed a particular concern after we route it, that we would go ahead and support it?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I don't see any disagreement. And that's the only ones I have. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, and have a lot of fun this week. Let me know if you need other supporting materials.
The joys of being on the legislative committee. Our final item tonight is a discussion of council grants program. And does staff want to tell us anything about what's in the packet, or shall we just discuss?
I think you should probably just discuss, but the big issues to be dealt with are how do you want to handle, when we have the audience, so how do you want to handle the requests that you receive? Do you want this program to include the requests you receive each year or every other year from groups to have funding included in the budget for their program? And do you want them to be included in this process? And another question is, how would this relate to the the assistance the city provides for the festivals. Does that relate to this at all, or do you just want to continue to consider that separately? And that's something that's budgeted for each year.
Yeah, I thought it would be a good idea to look at this program in the context of what we already do, because yes, we put $5,000 in the budget for, I guess, kind of new funding, but we've got a lot of other things, some of which are mentioned in the cover memo, like currently the Mosaic project. I think it's, what, $30,000 for Main Street. The Crossroads Farmers Market, do you remember the amount on that?
It's $25,000.
Wasn't it going to 15 and then down? Wasn't it farm?
It's $25,000 for this year.
That's right, that was their budget.
Then we've had, we just discussed and raised the amount for the Independence Day Committee. We, in the past, had money that we earmarked for the Tastes of Tacoma. We haven't done that in a couple of years, but they came back with a request just in the last couple of weeks. That we had the money in the last 2 years' budgets for Safe Tacoma, which was...
Yeah, you gave a total of $75,000, just it was allocated over 2 separate fiscal years.
Right. And the film festival is here tonight, and Historic Tacoma, so that there are, when thinking about those, if we kind of say, oh, those are separate, and then we're looking at 5,000 here, that doesn't really get our arms around what we're dealing with and what we do. So I think we probably need to make sure that we recognize all of the various things that we already do, what the status on those is, and so that we can understand how we can deal with requests from people who haven't gotten money, understand that within the context of the money that we already do, and recognize that the money that we already give to various groups, in many cases we may feel like, well, we've made a commitment, a long-term commitment for that, and we want to continue to do that, but we should at least kind of be clear in that among ourselves so that we can state that or say that we'll know maybe that was seed money, as in some cases where we've done in the past and said, just we'll help you get started and then that's it. Also recognizing that we want to make sure that we're not just giving money to kind of, we don't want there to be a perception where it's not the case that you get money because of who you know. There needs to be the sense among people that if you're somebody new with a new idea, that you can bring it forward and it will be well received and considered, and that there's the possibility to do new things, and that's the way we're going to get participation from a wider group of residents in the city, and maybe come up with some new and interesting things. So we want to make sure that it's not just, oh, well, it's the same old people who know the right people who continue to get the money and everybody else is shut out. Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. It seems to me there are, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking first we probably would want to change its name from council grants to something else. Because it does sound like it's a pot of money that council allocates, which is what I thought we were trying to get away from. And then the other thing I was thinking of is we have projects like some of the ones listed on the blue sheet, like the OTBA Main Street Program, Mosaic Project, that are bigger things, part of the council's priorities. And then there are the kind of new ideas that you were also talking about. And I think that's I don't know how exactly to draw the line, but I think if we could develop language that would talk about new ideas or seed money or things like thinking outside the box or new ways of doing things, I'm not sure exactly what the language would be, to carve out something that was separate, so that we wouldn't have the kind of obvious thing, well, why doesn't everything just go through this program, which was my initial thought. But I think I see a reason why we wouldn't want to do that, why we would want to have two separate tracks, if you will. Because I don't think we have all the ideas, is one reason. And getting input from the community and supporting that is really important. So I think what I would like to see is some language that carved out a separate piece for a grant program.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you. I think the types of organizations that I envision applying for these kind of grants are really the types of organizations that make this a community. And as such, and this isn't the time to talk about it, but when we talk about the planning for a grant process, I think we should think that maybe at some point we will have more money in the pot than $5,000. That's what we put in for this year. But I don't think we need to think that that because it's a relatively small amount of money that we need some kind of a simple grant process or not spend much time on it. I think we need to craft something that we would feel comfortable if we or a future council puts in more money, because I think more money is justified. I think look at the many organizations out here in the community that I think we should be nurturing them and helping them to serve the community in ways that that really the government cannot. And I think what's more local than your local organizations.
Councilmember Wright.
It seems to me that there's maybe some distinction between organizations that we, going in, know that we're going to support on a much more ongoing basis. I would take OTBA in this way. I think it actually is almost serving a function of the government around assisting in doing economic development in a certain area of the city. We might choose to do that in some other area of the city also, versus something like Safe Tacoma, where it's very clear that it was a startup or seed grant, that it wasn't something we're going to fund on an ongoing basis. So to Terry's point, maybe we should be thinking, okay, well, how much money do we want in this pot of funds that is to start up or to begin organizations? Maybe as this says, they could get funding for 3 years in a row. And then if someone comes to us and says, well, we'd like money, we say, here's the grant process. And it doesn't seem like $5,000. If the grant process is only distributing $5,000, then it's sort of like, okay, but we need money, right? So I wonder, it would make us commit to putting more money into that pot, but thinking about it in those two lenses.
And if I can just say that the 5,000 in the budget was a placeholder to kind of make sure that we had the discussion about what we might want to do, and rather than just having it in a vacuum. If there's no money, you say, well, we don't really need to have the discussion, we don't have any money.
Clever counsel at work.
Councilmember Robinson.
I like this topic. The first thing I did in Tacoma Park in 1986 was to take over the street festival from the city, who wanted to get it out of their hands as quickly as possible. They were sick of doing the street festival. And I'm trying to remember, I think the city threw in a couple $1,000s to run the street festival. And we have the expert here, but I think it's now grossing about $40,000 or something like that. After expenses, it nets about $25,000. So that's been a real success story for the city to get something out of its hands that's a community project that has gone up 50 times in its revenue. I also spent a good number of years on the CDBG committee, and so I remember that sometimes kind of horse trading about where's the CDBG money going to go. And there were times when it was uncomfortable before I was on the council. And yet I think that it's a good idea to have a committee that has advisory capacity on divvying this up. And I think it's a good idea to put a substantial amount of dollars into it. I'll come to the number I suggest in just a second. As far as the CDBG process, I think if it's a development grant committee, it shouldn't be called CDBG. It should cover CDBG and other grants that are available, perhaps. I note that the outline here calls for 3 staffers and 3 citizens. I just saw that. I haven't really thought that through. It might make sense to balance it in that way. It might also make sense to have a twice a year reporting back on what the thinking is on the part of the committee, or even more often. I like the notion of the following on the prioritized goals, and in the light of that street festival experience, thinking about what city services might be replaced or enhanced, and efficiencies. I like this document. Jesse, did you work on this? Where did this document come from? Jesse, I think this is really good. I'm sure it reflects a lot of the experience you've had over the years with committees. So.
And it's heavily borrowed from other documents, I have to say. There's not.
Well, I was impressed when I read it. A couple other things. I know that it's been the case amongst us when it comes to special projects to think, which is appropriate in terms of, well, is it even and fair ward to ward? And I think that's an important issue, and we can maybe use some of that money to spur development of good ideas beyond the core or beyond what exists now. And I like, Councilmember Snipper, your notion of 2 tracks with seed money, and the 1 track ought to be, in my mind, really like aggressively entrepreneurial in some way, while the other can be holding things together. And then my quick tally. Let's see. The mural was, what did you say? The mural expenditure, 20 and 30 for Old Town. That's 50, and 20 for the 4th of July celebration. That's 70, and 25 for the Crossroads. That's 95. Safe Tacoma, 120. Starting to add up here. If you throw all the things into the pot. So, what's an appropriate number? I think the 5 was good to have as a placeholder, but if we're realistic and want to put all these ideas in one place and see how we can divvy them up, maybe we should put 100,000 and even have 10,000 committed for each ward. That would address some of the ward-to-ward horse trading that might go on, and yet still have something in addition that could be allocated for citywide notions. So those are my thoughts on it. Nothing specific, except I just wanted to share those things that crossed my mind. Thank you.
The only thought I had about composition of the committee is whether we might do something like have one of the spots allocated to the Tacoma Foundation, for example. I know we've done that sometimes when we feel like there's an entity within the city that is particularly connected to whatever it is that would be going on. In this case, basically philanthropic endeavors by the city. and the Tacoma Foundation is sort of the philanthropic entity within the city, whether that might make sense, because they actually would know about a lot of different projects that are going on, and presumably the person from the Tacoma Foundation would know something about philanthropic giving in the process. Just a thought.
Yeah, because I had kind of two thoughts about them. One was, gee, kind of, they're already doing it, and did we want to kind of outsource, throw in with them? But then, on the other hand, and they've been expanding the reach of who they're contacting and the types of projects that they're funding, but also feeling like, in some ways, that's too easy, and I think it's better to. I'd like to think a little bit more about maybe, having some way of saying that there's something that we might want to do to provide where there needs to be something to do with a match. I don't know, some way of having a link to them, but having our own process. And I can see where it would be good, I think, to recognize the amount that we're already spending in areas like this, and have a way to kind of bring all those numbers together so that we're not kind of going, well, gee, what now? Are we also talking about money for the Arts and Humanities Commission, or is that seen as different? An understanding of what's out there, and have kind of a sense of what that pot is, and say, and there's this other piece that is the startups, is the seed money, kind of deal with the big picture, but divide it into the two different sections in how we deal with it and the process, because we don't need a process like is proposed in this document for some of the ones that are already well established and we know that we're going to continue. So I don't want to necessarily just think about, kind of putting them in that same pot and saying it's a bigger pot. And it's almost like then you're forcing them to fight for their piece that we know that we're going to do.
Then you open up another can of worms with committees and commissions.
Right. So it's a question of how many of these things we see as different than the others, how many categories we have, how those categories get treated, and it would be helpful for the city manager in knowing what number to have to think about trying to wedge into the budget that's coming up.
I guess the question I have, Mayor Williamson, listening to your comments, is you reference those that we know we're going to continue to support. And I guess I don't know of any organization that I'm assuming from one budget year to another that this council is automatically going to support. So I guess that's the question I have.
Well, in saying that, I was thinking about if we include things like the Independence Day Committee. The sense is that there has been ongoing support. We just increased that support. I can't see us then turning around in a year and saying, no, there's no money in the budget for the Independence Day Committee. Councilmember Robbins.
Think of it as an entrepreneurial venture. What if the Independence Day Committee decided they didn't want our money anymore because they wanted the freedom to do exactly as they pleased, and they developed a fundraising drive that brought them $100,000, and they had a big gala.
Wonderful.
We have an opening on the committee.
And they turned to us and said, that $20,000 we've been getting from you, don't bother. So I think it's worth not assuming that funding is, I think it is good for us to, well, what are the words? I don't want to assume that the Independence Day Committee is always going to get $20,000 just because we passed that this year.
Well, all I'm saying is that I see them in a different category than a potential startup. I think the amounts could be different. I think the approach could be different. And on the one hand, I hear what you're saying. On the other hand, I don't want to needlessly make all of the people who are involved in various things all of a sudden get very antsy because they think that maybe they're really going to have to come in and fight for their money, and do we want to take all the time to engage in that with them when the result is fairly foreordained?
Well, there's one thing, there's a difference between fighting for the money and coming up with a new vision to leverage and expand. I mean, I'll go back to the street festival. It started out we gave a couple thousand, and now it's bringing in 25,000 net to the business association. It was a little festival, and it's now a much bigger festival, and it's become, you know, we got like 50-to-1 leverage, bang for our buck, and got out of the expenditure very quickly, and it was what the council wanted at that time. I don't know. In my mind, the festival, yeah.
I'll just note to send all the people who get agitated your direction. Councilmember Ryan.
I'll send them to Rod.
Well, I think it is an interesting thing that Councilmember Robbins is raising of sort of, are we expecting that people are going to come up with a business plan to get to self-sustainability or self-sufficiency with some of these grants? I mean, I think some of them, that's probably not the case. Some of the things we're doing because the market, or there is no, you know, the only way they're going to be provided for is by the government. But are we suggesting that some of these things are with the understanding, more like the understanding we have with the farmers market, the Crossroads Farmers Market? Their idea is that they are going to get to sustainability under a certain business plan.
Which is what happened with the original farmers market,
Right.
which was originally under the city and now is independent with an independent board.
Right, but I mean, it's sort of interesting. The Independence Day Committee is actually sort of going in the opposite direction right now, right? They're doing the reverse of what
they became more dependent.
Right, they became more dependent, and that might be okay because that's something we want to support, and we feel like the money is not there in some business model, whether it's charity-wise or not, to be self-sustaining. Or do we want to say to the Independence Day Committee, and I'm not picking on the Independence Day Committee, but do we want to say to entities, well, you have to have a plan within this number of years to get to self-sustainability? Maybe the Independence Day Committee would rethink about how they raise money, or have sponsorships, or charge the politicians to ride in the parade, whatever it was.
It's interesting to think of it as kind of everybody's moving back and forth, and we would have to be clear in our policy and in our statement of what the criteria are, so that there was a clear understanding and they didn't feel like they got surprised.
Right. I very much agree with you. We shouldn't have a surprise and have people come back with all this agita because one year they got $20,000 and the next year it was a complete surprise that they were getting nothing.
Right.
And so all of this will require more work on our part. Councilmember Snicker.
Moving to a slightly different part of the discussion. Under evaluation, I think I would like to add either one or two additional items, depending on how you think of them. I think another evaluation criteria should be the organization, the ability of the organization to carry it out, and or the ability of the people. In other words, the director of the project, or if it's a bigger project, you know, is it more than that one person? If it's just a, you know, three-person operation, you know, whatever. Just another criteria that allows you to look at the people who are doing it and the organization that are doing it, make sure that they're able to carry it out.
Like the ability of the officers of the organization or the leaders.
Yeah, because in my experience, most projects are entirely people-driven and organizational-driven, and the other criteria are important, but you know, if you have great people, they'll carry out a good project. If you have mediocre people, no matter what, it'll just fall apart.
And which just reminded me that another group that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we gave some money to, who we haven't mentioned so far, who wants to come back and talk to us, is the Community Indicators Project.
Yes.
So as we talk about this, we remember more and more of them, and the impact of what we're already doing grows, and I think it's helpful to have it all kind of listed in one place so that we know what it is, and maybe even a little bit of a matrix of what the current amounts are, any of them that we remember that are past amounts that have phased out, like the Tastes of Tacoma, and any of the formal ongoing commitments that there might be for any of them, where we said, well, you know, they're probably only the current year, but there may in fact be something like there was with the Safe Tacoma, where it was spread over the 2 years. There was a commitment there beyond some first piece, or am I wrong in that?
I think the only one that I can think of that had sort of an ongoing MOU where there was funding, I'm looking at Roz, is the initial funding for the Main Street program, I think was a 3-year commitment of $25,000 each year. When the council talked about this, under the current MOU, the council was only willing to do a 1-year MOU. So I don't think you have anything at this point that you have committed beyond this fiscal year.
I just comment that the one area of this draft plan that I feel least confident in, and I think we should consider how, whether this would be best or whether there might be a better way, and that's the makeup of the review committee. You know, I could sit here and say, well, I don't like the idea of 3 city staff and 3 community members, but it's easy to say that. It's hard for me to come up with a mix of a review committee that I feel comfortable with. I think that's one of the more difficult challenges we have. You know, picking community members who will provide an unbiased review of these grants may be difficult, because there's so many people with so many interests and so many different, if we open it up for, you know, the various events, I don't know. I just think that that whole review committee is going to be so important, and I think also so difficult to structure.
Councilmember Robinson.
I'd like to follow up on that comment and on Ruben's comment about the ability to carry it out, and just think and also touch on something that Councilmember Wright said. I kind of think about it as a review of a business plan, and I'll go back to the street festival for a second. I can't say that my colleagues and I ran it all that well the first couple of years. We burned out because it was a hard job and we didn't know what we were doing. And then there were a number of years where it floundered, not because, and that was the people who were trying to carry it out weren't able, I would say, or were less able to carry it out, and it floundered for a number of years. And then it got its breath and came back and then thrived. So, and in that case, in that sense, I think it was a good idea. It was, had sound business sense. Lots of people liked it. There were lots of vendors who wanted to come and put the tables in, and lots of bands wanted to play, and so it had a real resonance. To me, it had a solid market, I guess you'd say. And so, in thinking about who's going to be on the committee, it would be nice to give them guidance. Some of that's right here with to what extent will it advance the council's goals as stated in the strategic plan. We stick close to what our goals are, and projects and recipients are evaluated based on the strategic plan. That helps a lot. I would say that helps a lot.
Yeah. And one thought I had about the makeup of the committee, I was thinking a little bit about the CDBG committee. And the first thought I had was, gee, I wonder if there's any way of kind of combining the functions and then deciding maybe that isn't a good idea, but maybe it's a good model in that I think there's one staff and 7 or 8 people on the committee. Maybe even there were up to a dozen when I was on it. It may have changed in the intervening years, but I know that there were requests of citizen associations to name a rep. So that there might be some interesting possibilities for having a committee that rather than 3 staff and 3 residents might reduce the staff and increase the residents. I know that a lot of times the request when we're coming up with a potential new need for a new staff liaison is, gee, we've only got so many staff members who can cover these things, and I could see where if there were 3, if it was just, a quick turnaround of, I don't know, meetings in a short time period. On the other hand, the way this is set up, it's in March, which is budget time. Is that at all a constraint on staff availability?
It was actually intentional to tie it to the budget.
But I can see the time being good, but is it a good time for staff to be having to staff it?
It depends who staffs it. I mean, obviously, I'm pretty much through my budget discussions with the department heads in the first week of March, so as far as the remainder of the month, as long as it wasn't the finance director or me, it should be okay.
Okay.
And I wouldn't see us being the staff people to do this.
Timing-wise, though, in March, much of the budget year is through. Might it be a better time to do this right after the budget's been approved so that we've allocated a pot of gold for this process, and then we have a process to decide how we divide that up?
I think we were sort of along the same lines, Councilmember Siemens, just a little bit of a flip, which is we wanted to basically have the community have the opportunity to weigh in and see how many good ideas were out there. And then if the council felt that there were enough good ideas, you would have the opportunity during the actual budget process to increase the amount if there were a number of projects.
That makes sense, yeah.
You withdraw your idea. Councilmember Wright.
Councilmember Robinson said something that sparked in my mind. 2 things. One is I think if we're explicit with people, whoever the residents are, that we choose, that we want them to take this very seriously, and that they have to be objective, and it isn't about friendships or who they know, but really judging it on the ideas, I think generally people will try to really do that, particularly when they're told that explicitly and they have a sense that that's their responsibility. And then the second thing was we have 2, depending on what we do with this process, we have 2 potential victims in the audience. I didn't know if those potential victims had any thoughts, having heard this discussion, that they wanted to share in any way, Roz or Jim?
Those potential victims might be potential champions.
And come to the mic.
They have to come up to the table.
You choose.
Well, the film festival hasn't come with any direct request for funding for 3 years, actually a little over 3 years. And I should say that, our festival was one of those that was provided with some seed money. And now, we've talked among the folks who are, working on the project. We've talked with the Arts and Humanities Commission about different funding models. And, one of the issues with the film festival is that having a strong artistic director who knows film, and in our current case has some professional arts organizing experience, is really critical. So you can't really go the route of the poet laureate and seek a Tacoma Park resident, because some of the expertise that we need in order to put on the film festival may not be present in a Tacoma Park resident. In fact, Agnes lives about a block outside the city limits. But she's been great. She provided a community commitment. She actually raised some salary for herself and raised some grants, within that 3-year period that helped put on some great festivals. But the sustainability issue is tricky. And, we'd love to get the age in the double digits. But when grants are sought and not, and not funded, the ability for an organization who has received seed money to come back again, whether that be on only every 3 years or just whatever mechanism you had for a second appeal or that sort of thing, it would be critical because of the issue of sustainability and because of the issue of maybe this will change now with the federal stimulus, but there are shrinking pots of money for these sorts of arts oriented programming and festivals, and having a professional involved really is critical when you've got a mostly volunteer-run organization. The other thing that I would say is, we are working to keep our expenses down. We've got other ideas about raising money, selling T-shirts, asking for donations at the door. But what we don't want to get into, and this was speaking to what you had said, Mr. Mayor, of kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? We don't want to have to say, you should fund us and not Taste of Tacoma. You should fund us and not, the artist studio tour, or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of very important projects that are out there, and there are a variety of funding mechanisms: Tacoma Foundation, Arts and Humanities Commission, and then some kind of granting process that the council is in charge of. And I'll just end by saying that one of the categories that you might want to consider as being, one that you think about separately is the category of festivals. The city has decades and decades long history of supporting festivals that are free and open to the community. Some of them have been flipped from being run by the city to being run by the community. This is one of them. I mean, in its inception, the library staff and Ellen were instrumental in keeping it going in its initial years. Now they're no longer that involved that way. But in keeping with the kind of historic support for festivals throughout the history of the recent decades, I would suggest that maybe you look at festivals maybe differently than things like the Mosaic Project. Again, not robbing Peter to pay Paul, but sustainability is a concern to all of us. So I'll end with that, and I'd be happy to take questions if you have any. Thanks.
I think you all know me. I'm Roz Grigsby. I'm here representing Main Street Tacoma and the Old Tacoma Business Association. I want to echo the importance of the issue of sustainability. I happen to represent a very entrepreneurial group of people who are the local owners of independent businesses in our town. And in this process, we've discovered several things. One, that the work that we do, which in many ways I think parallels the work the city does for economic development. It happens that we are more narrowly defined than the whole city, is not necessarily work that's easily supported in an entrepreneurial way. We have been successful, as Councilmember Robinson mentioned, with the Street Festival, which feeds into Main Street Tacoma in order to finance a lot of the other things we've done. We have a number of sort of zero revenue activities, things that bring in just enough to cover the event, like concerts that we do downtown. And we have done other grant writing, and successfully in many cases, much of which is very specific to projects like facade improvement. It doesn't run the organization. And I think that part of what I like about the document in front of us is the priorities that it lays out for council in looking at what's important. And I think sustainability is essential. I think I've seen a number of funding bodies at all levels start things and then let go before they're ready to continue on their own, or if they're ready. And a lot of money, in a way, is wasted because things die before they've grown feet to stand on. And seed money is essential. It's not the only piece, I think. And so that gives council hard decisions to make in how you go about doing that. I think that there are things that I hope you will consider as in your jurisdiction. I think the Independence Day celebration is in my mind one of those. There's certain things that the city is best positioned to do, and certain things that community groups are well positioned to do. And the experience of launching successful endeavors that then take on a life of their own beyond the reach of the city obviously exemplifies the success stories. There are other things that don't lend themselves in the same way to the entrepreneurial spirit. And I have to say that in these times, there are fewer and fewer funding sources. We have fewer sponsors interested in the festival. We have a much harder time maintaining the ground we were standing on 2 years ago or last year. And I think that's something that would be unfortunate to not keep in mind now, because I think the cost of losing what's taken, in some cases, decades to create is very high, and I think recreating after that would be a much slower and more painful process. So I also, in the same time, welcome sort of an open and transparent process. And so I think in many ways, this is, a great step forward. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Then maybe we should take a minute to just kind of recap where we are and next steps. It sounds like, in general, we like this draft grants program. We sound like we want to revisit a little bit the makeup of a committee. It sounds like it would be helpful to have as comprehensive a list as possible of what we're currently doing. And it then sounds like what we need to do is maybe come back and, with that information, decide how we want to set up, the extent to which the money that we already do and any money that we add, how that gets recognized, organized, and how we use it to go forward. Is that a fair way to put it, or somebody want to try a little bit different take on that one? Or other items that we should use as our list for coming back on this? Councilmember Robinson?
I just think, I think that if we do put it all in one place and look at it, it'll be helpful. It'll really be helpful for us. Things will clarify. Oh, we need to keep doing that. That can maybe is growing legs. This one, let's take a chance on. And as long as we can, I think it's an opportunity, kind of like our work on the strategic plan, creating the strategic plan. It'll go back and forth and on a yearly level. I'm really glad that we're going down this path.
So maybe what we should look on this as is we've got money in the current year budget for items. We've got $5,000 in the current year budget for the FY 10 budget coming up. It would be helpful to have this discussion sooner rather than later with all of the money in one place, so that if there is anything that comes out of that we want to provide direction to the city manager for what goes into the next budget, now is the time to have that discussion. So it sounds like maybe if we can come back to this quickly, that would be helpful.
in that information we're going to get, it might, I don't want to create too much work for Barb to pull together, but if we had like the last 3 years, maybe, you know what I mean? So it's not just what we're doing this year, but maybe since Barb's been here, I know previous to that, it might be a little bit harder.
I was going to say, it's not a problem. I just jotted down most of the notes. I pretty much recall who you've given money to. So there'll be no problem at all.
That might just also.
And I think as we're thinking about programs the community provides for the residents, I think it's important to also remember the social services that we also support, because those are important programs.
And it's also helpful to have this context now, because upcoming fairly soon, we have the MOU with Historic Tacoma, and that ties in with this discussion.
And I think that this does tie in with the CDBG money, and we have to give some thought to how it ties in. CDBG crosses more than this type of these types of organizations, but it does support to some degree.
It's almost like if it doesn't fit in one, it might fit in the other.
Or that some of the money comes from a portion of CDBG.
Yeah, if I can, I'm glad Councilmember Siemens brought this up, is when I was thinking of kind of the list that you all have asked for, I wasn't thinking of the CDBG allocation process, which is something that's obviously has very strict limitations by, federal law. Do you want a recap of who's gotten money under that program?
I think it would be helpful to have that, even if it's just to have it kind of next to this discussion, because we might then recognize that if somebody's saying, well, we don't have anything in the grants process to deal with this piece, and we go, oh, but wait a minute, 5 of these CDBG projects in the last couple of years dealt with that. It would be good to know.
But also on the flip side of that, I don't want the social services to be locked into the small amount of money that CDBG normally is. That I think it's something the council should consider when it's looking at supporting the community through these types of grants.
Anything else that anybody wants to put on the table for what we come back with? Councilmember Snipper.
Well, I'm not sure you said this, so I'm going to speak up just to...
I will bet I didn't.
Well, it had to do with defining the sort of scope of this.
Yeah.
We're going to need some options, some possible definitions of what the scope is. Now, obviously getting a list of projects we funded and so on will help us do that, but it would be helpful if the staff could give us a little bit of some choices on that. Narrow, medium, broad.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at this and say, well, gee, that's kind of like the support we gave for day labor site.
Right.
That's true. That's another part.
That's kind of that's why
I love scope creep, don't you?
Scope creep. That's the phrase. I was trying not to say that.
Mouthwash creep. Is there anything else that the city manager needs clarity on from us? Okay. Anything else? We're adjourned.